See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee, performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA. See it in your Chevrolet.
Ascend into heaven. The war began in Eden when the dragon, known as Nakash, lured Adam and Eve into sinning with the lie, "Ye shall be as gods." I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Soon, humans multiplied upon the earth, and rather than worship God, they fell down at the feet of dragons. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation. But it wasn't enough for the dragons. They wanted to do more than just own mankind. They wanted to destroy them, to forever keep them from re-entering the divine council. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. The war raged on, where fallen angels descended onto mountaintops, spreading fear and false doctrine. It is a war for the souls of men, and only a Savior's blood could change the outcome. I will be like the Most High. Satan and his minions go by many names and wear many faces, but their strategy has always been to imitate God's truth. We call this war for men's minds the Great Inception. Learn the secret history of the spiritual war. Learn the names of the deceivers and what their true aims really are. Learn where they have struck and where they will strike again before it's too late. The Great Inception.
We're in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by an enemy that we've been told doesn't even exist. The pagan gods are imaginary, we've been taught, just lifeless blocks of wood and stone. The Great Inception shatters that illusion. It took me 2 years to pull this information together, research into archaeology, history, ancient languages, to show that the Bible stories you've known since childhood are actually literal accounts of supernatural warfare between God and the rebel gods who decided to reject the authority of their creator. My hope is that after reading The Great Inception, you come away with just one question. Why haven't we heard this in church before?
Why haven't we heard that in church before? That's a great question. Why haven't we heard that in church before? Could it perhaps have something to do with the fact that the mainstream church fundamentally operates on a business model and is mindful to steer clear of anything that the mass majority might deem to be too controversial, too crazy, or even too divisive? And for myself, hearing Derek Gilbert even ask that question is rather painfully ironic, as someone who myself spent many hours listening to his and Sharon's podcasts for many years, after first learning the reality of worldwide conspiracy and being confronted with things like the Nephilim in Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. In fact, Tom Horn was the first person I listened to online talking about the Book of Enoch, and it just rocked my world. But folks like the Gilberts and Tom Horn and Josh Peck and Michael Heiser and so many others, they're people that I've learned an awful lot from during that time, and actually were a great source of personal encouragement to me as well through a period where some days I really wondered if I was just going crazy. I even remember thinking a few times about how awesome it would be if, one day I could just have the privilege of sitting down in their kitchen and talking over a cup of coffee or something. And, I would have been really honored to meet them and shake their hands and just thank them for encouraging me with their podcasts. And, I'd probably want to talk about all kinds of prophecy related things and science fiction topics and whatever else. So then it's really been quite an experience to watch them and others be recruited by Tom Horn as a part of the SkywatchTV crew. see them pick up and move their whole life to a different part of the country to be a part of this ministry, quote unquote, and all that happened kind of right around the same time that the flat Earth topic really started exploding. And I probably don't need to tell many of you out there that the official stance by the Skywatch brand on flat Earth has been an emphatic refusal to even consider it, and instead denounce the topic as divisive and a distraction, despite the fact that really their entire ministry essentially centers around the prophetic ramifications of topics like the Nephilim, the Watchers, and of course the Book of Enoch, which they're even selling now. And so these folks honestly should be at the forefront of examining and teaching the biblically sound spiritual implications of enclosed cosmology. I mean, anyone still pointing to the Book of Enoch and laughing at flat Earth now, to me, is just blows my mind. But instead, they're just ignoring it and ridiculing it. I mean, they should be talking about it nonstop, but of course they are not. So while Derek rhetorically asks the question as to why the mainstream church isn't jumping in on the topic of his latest book, he kind of inadvertently shines the spotlight back on himself and SkywatchTV, and virtually every other professional prophecy author and Nephilim researcher, prophecy summit speakers, and all the rest. Even though none of these folks could be accused of getting rich off their book sales, nonetheless, what we see on the whole now is really just one never-ending commercial. It's this never-ending supply of the latest books and DVDs and teaching materials being peddled with the promise of being adequately informed to face the perilous and evil days ahead. It is a business, regardless of how large or little of a profit is actually being made off that business. And when you step into the realm of operating under a business model, when you enter into that quid pro quo arrangement, then the dynamic changes, period. It's not even a question of how much money is being made. It's not a matter of whether all the proceeds are funneled back into the cause or back into the ministry. That's totally besides the point. When you embrace the methods of marketing as the means by which truth should be spread to the masses, then, like it or not, truth is no longer simply valued for the sake of truth itself. It is then unavoidably affected by the constant consideration of how it can be sold as a product. Truth becomes a commodity. It becomes part and parcel to the same pandemic system of social engineering we call advertising. And that is a system which, at the end of the day, feeds off of carnality and off of sensationalization, feeds off of being entertaining. It also tends to feed off people's inherent infatuation with celebrity and hero worship, elevating certain people, putting them on a pedestal, even if it's just because we have a high regard for their research or their scholarship, etc., as is so often the case when we're talking about the various circles of Christian ministries. We see it with pastors and churches, we see it with creation ministries, we see it with prophecy teachers, and so on. So many people who start out with a genuine calling from God and a true gifting for teaching or preaching slowly over time get absorbed by the, quote, realities of supply and demand, the push and pull of the marketplace, the gradual influence of consumerism. And the brainwashing effects of consumeristic thinking, these forces have so much to do with why the vast majority of the population laughs at the idea of a stationary enclosed Earth in the first place. This is something that starts to become quite a painful realization when you start learning about the flat Earth, is that you begin to realize how we've all been programmed to believe the Earth is a globe, spinning through space since infancy, and not just in the classroom, but the majority of it actually comes through television, movies, billboards, logos, commercials, etc. It's embedded everywhere you look, and it's frighteningly similar to the movie They Live, where the hidden propaganda is on everything, only nobody can consciously see it. And so it really is just rather tragic at this point to see these folks now who, for so many of us, we've undoubtedly learned a lot from them over the years, but because now they've made this decision to become a, quote, real ministry, with a budget, and with that inevitably comes a wariness of not wanting to cause too much upheaval amongst the financial support base. It becomes an issue when, even though you may not be getting rich whatsoever, in fact, I'm pretty confident that folks like the Gilberts probably sacrificed a lot to move out there, and they're and I think they gave up good paying jobs to go out there and do what they're doing. So they've actually lost money. And so again, it's not about profit, it's not about getting rich or financially profiting, but nevertheless, when your ministry is your livelihood, then you have now invited in certain dynamics into your thinking, which otherwise, might not be as much of a factor in determining what you're open to investigating and what you're not. And it's kind of crazy because even just when listening to this interview here between Peck, the Gilberts, and Michael Heiser, there are several things they discuss here that if only they were willing to look at it, they would find that it's just so much of a richer explanation when considered through the perspective of enclosed cosmology.
In Eden, what do you both think the stones of fire are?
You actually have, again, in those chapters, you have this connects back to the Old Testament thinking that divine beings were stars, and the stars were divine beings, that whole thing. And they shine, so they must be fiery, they must be on fire. And so you get this kind of language in these chapters of Enoch describing members of the divine council as, fiery stars, fiery mountains even. So
for all of us who've been finding ourselves delving into this amazing and paradigm-shattering research on the flat Earth topic, it's tough because examples like this, I believe, ultimately serve as a very somber challenge to us right now in this very precarious position that we're in. And everyone is so excited about wanting to see flat Earth go mainstream and flat Earth go viral. And, everyone's just kind of got their eye on that and seeing every time it's mentioned in the news, and really starting to get serious about trying to put on a quote unquote serious professional, front for the world and for the masses of flat Earth. But this stage that we're in right now, I think, forces us to ask some really prickly, uncomfortable questions as flat earthers in general, but particularly those of us who believe the Bible to be the Word of God, and that we are indeed living on the edge of some very trying times as believers in Jesus. Questions such as, do we seriously believe that we're going to use that appetite-driven, Illuminati-controlled media system to spread the truth of flat Earth to the masses? I mean, is that even at all logical? Are we going to use that same mindset of consumerism and advertising and marketing that has closed the minds of so many people and somehow flip it around to where that's going to be the avenue to bringing people to truth, is particularly saving truth? Are we going to become just like the people who've been too afraid to look at flat Earth and thinking that, well, we finally arrived and there's nothing else that we need to be open to question? We need to put ourselves within that same box. In the end, I'm unable to simply resign myself to the notion that things like self-promotion, commerce, and marketing strategies, and that they're inevitable and must be accepted, whether we like it or not, as the de facto approach to sharing and seeking the truth. In my rather short lifetime, I've already watched the church make that tragic decision with disastrous results, and more recently we've seen the fringe Christian prophecy arena effectively put itself in the same self-limiting box of consumer conscientiousness. And part of what has thrilled me so much about the Flat Earth Awakening in the past few years is just that it's continued to grow and expand despite the fact that it's been ostracized by both the mainstream Christian church as well as the broader truth movement. So ultimately, it's my sincere conviction that existential truths, like who we are, where we live, and who created us, are not to be treated as just another commodity, another product to be packaged, marketed, and sold. That kind of truth should be shared freely and treated as sacred, because it is sacred.
and where they will strike again before it's too late. The Great Inception.
We're in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by an enemy that we've been told doesn't even exist. The pagan gods are imaginary, we've been taught, just lifeless blocks of wood and stone. The Great Inception shatters that illusion. It took me 2 years to pull this information together, research into archaeology, history, ancient languages, to show that the Bible stories you've known since childhood are actually literal accounts of supernatural warfare between God and the rebel gods who decided to reject the authority
Of men, and only a Savior's blood could change the outcome. I will be like the Most High. Satan and his minions go by many names and wear many faces, but their strategy has always been to imitate God's truth. We call this war for men's minds the Great Inception. Learn the secret history of the spiritual war. Learn the names of the deceivers and what their true aims really are. Learn where they have skins. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation. But it wasn't enough for the dragons. They wanted to do more than just own mankind. They wanted to destroy them, to forever keep them from re-entering the divine council. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. The war raged on, where fallen angels descended onto mountaintops, spreading fear and false doctrine. It is a war for the soul.
See it in your Chevrolet.
I will ascend into heaven. The war began in Eden when the dragon, known as Nakash, lured Adam and Eve into sinning with the lie. Ye shall be as gods. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Soon, humans multiplied upon the earth, and rather than worship God, they fell down at the feet of dragons.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee, performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA.